Good morning, David.
Good morning, Karat.
Tell us, how do we choose the best risk response strategy?
A good question, an important question, because the risk response strategy, when we implement it, is the thing which is actually going to manage the risk. So until we implement a risk response strategy, all we've done is identify and analyze and decide what we could do.
Right.
And then we implement the risk response strategy, and then we manage the risk. So we need to choose the right one. If we chose the wrong risk response strategy, then maybe we don't change the risk at all, or actually we could make things worse if we choose something completely inappropriate. And certainly we could be wasting time and money. So it is important to choose an appropriate risk response strategy. Now, as a reminder, there are 5 threat response strategies and 5 opportunity response strategies, which we covered in a previous video. So for threats, we can decide to avoid the threat, kill it completely. We can transfer it, get someone else to take it away.
Yeah.
We could reduce it, try and make it smaller. We could accept it, do nothing, monitor it with a contingency plan. Or maybe it's not ours, we can escalate it to someone else who owns the objectives that would be affected. On the opportunity side, we have matching strategies, so we could exploit an opportunity, grab it and capture it, make it happen. We could share it with someone else who will help us to make it happen. We could enhance it to make it bigger. We can accept it, just monitor with a contingency plan if it happens. Or if it's not ours, we escalate it to somebody else. Now, those 5 things happen in order. So the best thing to do, if it's ours, if we ignore the escalate, if it's escalate, you just escalate it. But if it's a big threat or a big opportunity, the best thing to do is obviously to avoid the threat and exploit the opportunity.
Yeah.
If we can't do those, the next best thing is to transfer or share, get somebody else to avoid it or exploit it for us.
Yeah.
If we can't do those, the next best thing is to say, let's make the threat as small as possible and the opportunity as big as possible. And the last response we want is to accept the risk if we have to. So there is a priority order amongst those different strategies. Start at the top and work down.
Yes.
But there's something else we need to think about. 2 factors, in fact. The first is cost effectiveness. We don't want to spend $1 million to avoid a threat which would only cost us $10,000.
Yes.
We don't want to spend $1 million to capture an opportunity that only saves us $10,000. We want to do it the other way around. Spend $10,000 in order to remove the threat of $1 million, or in order to capture the saving of $1 million. So it has to be cost effective. That means what we need to do is to measure the cost of the response and the cost of the impact, and look for the highest possible ratio of change in the impact to the cost of the response. So I might reduce the impact of a threat from $1 million to $500,000 by spending $10,000. That gives me a leverage or leverage.
Yeah.
So I reduce it by 500,000 and spend 10. So that gives me 50. Maybe I could reduce it from $1 million to 0 by spending 100,000. That will give me a leverage of 10. So which is the better response? It's the one with the higher leverage. Okay.
Yes.
So we can look at the saving or for the opportunity or the removed penalty from a threat and look for cost effectiveness. That's one thing.
Yes.
The other is risk effectiveness. So the risk is not just its impact. The risk is the probability and the impact combined. How big is the risk? Uncertainty that matters. And what we want is to have an impact on the risk exposure as effective as possible.
Yes.
So here we're looking at changes in the size of the risk for the amount of money we spend. How much have we reduced the overall threat exposure, or how much have we increased the potential opportunity exposure for spending this money? So that's called risk efficiency. So we're looking, risk effectiveness.
Yes, yes.
So we're looking for cost-effective and risk-effective responses. So the first thing is to look down the list of the strategies in order.
Yes.
The second thing is to consider cost-effectiveness and risk-effectiveness.
Yes.
And then there's one last thing. In your question you said, which is the best risk response strategy? How do we choose the best one?
Yes.
There may not be one. It might be best for now, but if we try that and then it doesn't work or it doesn't quite work as expected, we might want to do something later. So maybe we choose now to avoid a threat, but once we've tried to avoid it, we find we couldn't avoid it completely, then we have to maybe choose later to try and reduce it further. And maybe then later on we find we can't reduce it any further, so we have to accept it. But what we're doing is, by choosing a strategy, we're deciding what actions we're going to take now to manage the risk.
Okay.
So what we want is to choose the best strategy for now, and recognize that there might be a better strategy later, but we'll think about that later. We're defining our actions now in order to manage the risk.
Correct.
So
That's correct.
the question is really, how do I choose the best response strategy for now?
That's right. I like the whole thinking of being selective and tailoring, and not just saying one size fits all. This is the best. Everyone can go with it. Yeah, definitely, it makes a lot of sense for risk practitioners or even anyone else from any industry to see what's on hand and what suits best.
Exactly.
Which response strategy is the best.
Must always make a choice.
It's very, very dependent on the circumstance. Thank you,
right.
David. Thank
It's a
you very
pleasure.
much.
Pleasure.